Chances are that most people who stumble across Unsung Heroes probably don't click on episodes like this first. In fact, I would predict that this particular episode, even for fans of the series, would probably take a little bit longer than usual to jump up to that usual 1,000 or 1,200 views that most of the episodes in this series tend to get, at least in the first couple of weeks anyway. The reason for that is obvious. It's a Skoda. Now, Skoda is actually one of my favourite brands, but the simple fact is people don't think of certain brands such as Skoda, Saab, Fiat, a couple of others too for sure, as being brands which could offer anything that will surprise you. People know these days, for instance, that Skoda has high-performance models. The VRS, the Octavia, the Fabia, very good rally cars. The Skoda Fabia rally car is my favourite rally car of all time. So people are aware of these modern ones, the very heavily Volkswagen-influenced models. But this one, I would say, is even more significant than today's VRSs or even than those rally cars because of what it represents. Because this was actually not a concept car. It was technically kind of an aftermarket custom, but it was built by Skoda UK, and it was built as a PR stunt in 1997 to attract more attention, not just to the Felicia, but to what was happening for Skoda. And that is one of the reasons why I think this car deserves to be talked about, not because it ever reached production, because it didn't, but what they did in a very ironic sense, and probably a very deliberate one I should think, you'd have to talk to the guys involved, is I believe they probably looked back at what Volkswagen's engineers did back in the 70s with the Mark I Golf. Because for those who don't know, the Golf GTI was not a thing. Engineers built a GTI and then Volkswagen liked it so much that they made it. Now, I don't think they necessarily thought that Skoda would do the same thing with this, but it was a similar principle. They took this very unassuming little Skoda, the Felicia, which incidentally is the last of the true original Skodas. Everything after this is very heavily leaning on the Volkswagen technology, Volkswagen engineering, all for the better, I would say, but they took that and then they merged it very directly with parts from what was now becoming their parent company of Volkswagen and made this hot version of the Felicia. And as is suggested by the name, it's powered by the Golf VR6 engine, in particular the Mark III. It's a 2.8 litre V6, which is a very beefy engine for such a small hatchback. It's more the kind of size of a Polo rather than a Golf, so to have such a massive engine is potentially very impressive. Now the car has, of course, the associated specs of that Golf, so 204 horsepower and 200 pound-feet of torque. That is really cool to have in something that is just this small, old-school, rickety-looking little Skoda. I have no doubt that this thing was probably very quick. Now, I'm not sure what the drivetrain actually was, but I would believe it's probably still front-wheel drive. Now, if that is the case, doubtless it was still very quick. Probably the fastest production Skoda up until that point, it's pretty safe to say, or at least production-based Skoda. And the car itself is not just a Volkswagen-hearted vehicle in terms of its engine, but it's actually got other Volkswagen parts as well. The steering unit and the radiator are from a diesel Golf model, and even the brakes are from the Volkswagen Corrado Coupe. So it's kind of a parts bin special, but one that isn't just like taken from a Max Power magazine or Pimp My Ride. It's, although arguable in terms of taste, the yellow seats, for instance, certainly divide opinion, but the concept behind the car, what they were trying to go for, I think is actually very impressive, because in a way, they almost kind of predicted what would become for the company, because although the VR6, or I should say VRS models that come from Skoda nowadays don't have these big V6 Volkswagen sourced traditional petrol engines, they went more down the diesel route, and I think it's all for the better because it made them feel more speciality. They had this great mix of practical and performance, and this car really represented that mix, really, where it was the tipping point between brands. Because the Felicia was produced from 94 to 2001, this happened right in the middle of that in 97, and it was this very crucial time where Skoda changed from being what it was to what it is. And I think that this car almost single-handedly represented that change, from being how Skodas were viewed to how they are now. And as a huge Skoda fan, and for any Skoda fans out there, I think you can probably appreciate it from that point of view as well. I think this is a very cool little car. I love what they were going for with it. I love the fact that it's yellow as well. Happens to be my favourite colour. I like the style. It's relatively understated. It even looks kind of like a Volkswagen, what they would do to it. I love it. I think it's a really cool little one-off. We don't tend to talk about aftermarket cars that often in this series, but when we do, I try to make it really interesting ones, like the twin-engined Audi TT, or this one, and a couple of others which we haven't even discussed yet. So this one is probably one of the slowest cars we've ever discussed, but I still think it's a very cool little car in its own way. And, for those who are wondering, it wasn't stripped down, used for parts, or crushed, or put in a museum. It was sold. In fact, it's done the rounds on the Piston Heads classified ads and been sold to different people. I believe it's still in the UK now, even. So it's nice that the car, although definitely an unsung hero, pretty obviously, it was just an aftermarket version of a single car, it's nice that somebody, probably multiple people, have actually enjoyed the fruits of that. They've owned it, they've driven it, they've enjoyed this kind of first generation Volkswagen Skoda mashup, which has become so normal now and so good, I would say. So, a very cool little car, I think, and one that you really have to think about to appreciate why it's actually a lot cooler than you could easily think it is. More so because of what it represents than even what it can do on its own. But that's it for this episode overall. Of course, you can click through here at the end to see all of the previous episodes of this series, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.